She had only planned to rest for a while. The journey was long, the morning was early, and the night before had been restless. So when the aircraft climbed through the clouds and settled into smooth air, the woman sitting in seat 7C slowly let her eyes close. She wasn't fully asleep, just drifting between thoughts and light dreams, the kind of half-sleep people fall into during long travel. Around her, passengers whispered, flipped pages, watched movies, and waited for the hours to pass. The flight felt normal, almost too normal. The seatbelt signs were off. The flight attendants were moving around with soft smiles, and the gentle hum of the engines seemed steady enough to calm anyone. She had flown many times before, but never thought much about planes or how they were. Controlled. To her, flying was just a routine part of life. Sit down, buckle in, land somewhere new. Nothing else. But somewhere ahead, behind the locked door of the cockpit, something wasn't right. That the woman in 7C sensed none of it. She rested, her head against the window, letting the sunlight warm her hair. The world below looked peaceful, the clouds soft and endless. She took a slow breath, thinking about the meeting she had tomorrow and the people waiting to see her. Life wasn't perfect, but she felt calm today. It was supposed to be an easy day, then she heard it. A voice, calm but shaking a little, came through the speakers. It wasn't the usual announcement, not the typical greeting or weather update. It was short, strange, too serious. Ladies and gentlemen, if there is anyone on board with flying experience, please contact the crew immediately. Her eyes opened. Not wide at first, just enough to look around. But then the words hit her fully, and her heart jumped. She sat up straight. Other passengers did too. A few whispered to each other, confused. Had she heard correctly? Anyone with flying experience? Why would a captain ask something like that? The woman blinked several times, trying to process it. Something about the tone felt off. It wasn't panic, but it wasn't casual either. It sounded like someone trying to stay calm while dealing with something unexpected. A flight attendant walked fast down the aisle, not running, but moving with a purpose that made everyone uneasy. People watched her carefully, as if trying to read her face. She kept a polite smile, but her eyes were tight, worried that the woman in 7C felt her chest tighten. She wasn't a pilot. She wasn't even close. The closest she had ever been to flying anything was holding a toy plane when she was a child. Still, she kept listening, hoping someone, anyone, would press the call button. But the cabin stayed quiet. Nobody raised a hand. Nobody said, "I can." Nobody moved. She swallowed hard. Why wasn't anybody responding? Surely someone on a plane this full would know something. Maybe a retired pilot. Maybe someone who trained before, but changed jobs. Maybe a co-pilot traveling as a passenger. Minutes passed. Too many minutes. The flight attendant returned, her steps faster this time. She whispered to another crew member, and the look they exchanged made the woman's stomach drop. Something serious was happening behind that cockpit door. Then the announcement returned. This time it was the captain himself, but his breathing was uneven. "Please, if anyone has training, any training at all, we need your assistance." Passengers looked at each other. Some covered their mouths, some grabbed their armrests. Some prayed quietly. The woman in 7C felt her heartbeat in her ears. She didn't like fear. She didn't like uncertainty. And for the first time in her life while flying, she realized how helpless she actually was. The people controlling the plane, the ones who always felt distant and in charge, something was wrong with them. Something must have happened. She tried to stay calm. She tried to breathe slow. But her mind kept replaying the captain's words. Why would he say, "any training at all"? What kind of emergency needed a total stranger to step inside the cockpit? The man sitting beside her shook his head. "This can't be real," he whispered. "This only happens in movies." She glanced at him, then back at the aisle. She didn't know what to say. Her throat felt tight. Another passenger stood and approached the crew. He wasn't confident. His steps were hesitant. He looked back twice before reaching the attendant. I did some flying classes years ago, he said quietly, almost embarrassed. The attendant studied him, then nodded, relieved but still nervous. She guided him toward the cockpit. People watched as he disappeared behind the curtain. The entire cabin went silent. The woman in 7C didn't blink. Her hands were cold. She didn't know the man. She didn't even know if he had enough experience to help. All she knew was that something inside the cockpit needed immediate support. The engines continued their steady hum, but they no longer sounded comforting. They sounded distant, mechanical, almost threatening. She looked out the window again. But the sky no longer looked peaceful. It looked too big, too empty, too far from the ground. Her seat suddenly felt smaller. The air felt thinner. Everything felt uncertain. She whispered to herself, "Please let everything be okay." But deep inside, something told her this was only the beginning. The curtain closed behind the man who had stepped forward, and for a moment, the entire cabin stayed frozen. Nobody spoke, nobody moved. Even the children on board stayed strangely quiet, as if they understood something serious was happening. The woman in 7C kept staring at the empty space where he had walked. She didn't know him, but she felt a strange connection to him. Maybe it was because he was the only one who had found enough courage to stand up. Maybe it was because the rest of the passengers, including her, felt helpless. Or maybe it was because the silence that followed had become heavier than before. She tried to listen, hoping to hear something from behind the cockpit door. A voice, a sound, anything. But all she heard was the soft hum of the engines, and a few nervous whispers floating through the cabin. The minutes passed too slowly. A flight attendant finally moved down the aisle again. She was trying to keep a calm expression, but her hands were trembling slightly. When she reached 7C, she paused, touched the seat back lightly, and gave a small apologetic smile. The kind of smile someone gives when they're trying to hide worry. "Is everything okay up there?" The woman asked quietly. The crew member hesitated. "We're doing everything we can," she answered, keeping her voice low. "The captain is not feeling well. We are checking all options. Not feeling well." The phrase sounded too soft for an emergency like this, too gentle, too controlled. But the woman didn't press further. She could see the attendant didn't want to say more. Suddenly, a soft alarm tone echoed briefly from the front. Not loud, but loud enough to make the passengers jump. A few people gasped. Someone grabbed their partner's hand. The woman in 7C felt her heart stop for a second. The tone ended quickly, but the fear did not. The man who had gone into the cockpit still wasn't out. She tried to imagine what he was seeing in there. A silent captain? A strange control issue? A flashing warning light? Nobody knew, and the not knowing was worse than anything. After some time, the curtain moved again. A different crew member stepped out, not the man. The passenger who went in had not returned. The attendant walked with fast steps toward the back of the plane, carrying something, a tablet or manual maybe, but her expression told everyone that the situation was far from stable. The woman in 7C leaned forward, elbows on her knees. Her breathing felt shallow. She wished she could do something, anything, but all she could do was sit and wait. She noticed other passengers reacting the same way. One person was rubbing their forehead, another was praying softly, another was staring blankly at the seat screen that was now frozen on the menu page. Then the plane made a very small dip, just a slight change in angle, something a regular passenger might ignore on a normal day. But today wasn't normal. Not after the captain's message. People looked up instantly. The woman gripped her armrest. Her breath caught. She waited to see if it would happen again. The engines continued at the same power, but the tiny movement, had already shaken the calm she was trying so hard to hold. A few seconds later, there was another shift. A little to the left this time. Not dangerous, but unusual. A cabin filled with nervous murmurs. A young man from 2 rows behind said, "That's not normal, right?" Nobody answered him. The woman pressed her back into the seat, trying to steady herself. Her thoughts ran wild. Was the man in the cockpit trying something? Was the plane flying on autopilot alone? Was someone else taking control? Her imagination became her enemy. Another announcement came, this time from a different voice. One she hadn't heard before. It wasn't the captain. It wasn't the co-pilot. It was the passenger who had stepped in earlier. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm working with the crew. Please remain calm. We are assessing the situation." His voice sounded steady, but not confident. More like someone trying to reassure himself as much as everyone else. But the moment he spoke, something inside the woman in 7C shifted. For some strange reason, she felt more connected to him. Maybe because he was one of them, a passenger just like the rest. And now he was talking from the cockpit. More whispers filled the cabin. "That man. He's the one who said he only did a few classes, right? How can he help? What happened to the co-pilot? Why did they need him?" Speculation started spreading like a quiet wave. The woman tried not to listen, but it was impossible. Fear feeds on uncertainty, and the atmosphere was full of both. Then, without warning, the flight attendants began securing the cabin. They moved fast, checking overhead bins, ensuring seats were upright, asking passengers to remain seated. The woman noticed they were avoiding eye contact, a sign that whatever was happening was more serious than they were allowed to say. She felt her throat tighten again. Another small shift in the aircraft came, this time a slight rise, like someone testing the controls. The engine stayed loud and steady, but tension spread through the cabin like cold air. Suddenly, the curtain near the cockpit opened again. This time, the man from earlier stepped out for a moment. Just for a second. He didn't walk into the aisle. He didn't speak loudly. He simply leaned closer to a flight attendant and whispered something. The woman watched his face closely. He didn't look panicked, but he didn't look confident either. There was focus in his eyes, concentration, responsibility. Then he went back in. The curtain closed once again. The woman in 7C exhaled slowly. Her hands were still shaking, but something about the man's expression gave her a tiny spark of hope, just a tiny one. But on a flight full of fear, even a small spark felt like a lifeline. She didn't know what was coming next. Nobody did, but one thing was clear. Whatever was happening inside the cockpit was far from over. The woman in 7C felt the plane settle again. But this time it wasn't a dip or a rise. It was a long, steady glide, smoother than before. It almost felt intentional, as if someone was trying to keep things calm. The engines hummed at a softer tone now, not loud, not strained, just controlled. But that didn't ease her mind. If anything, the sudden smoothness made everything feel more uncertain. Passengers exchanged glances, trying to read each other's expressions like silent questions. Was the danger increasing or decreasing? Was the man in the cockpit managing things better now? Or was this the calm before something worse? The woman sat upright, hands folded tightly in her lap. She wasn't shaking anymore, but she felt a cold heaviness in her chest. Her thoughts were too loud. Every scenario her mind created felt worse than the last. Yet she couldn't stop imagining them. Another passenger across the aisle, an older woman, reached out and touched her arm gently. "It will be fine," she whispered in a shaky voice. "We just need patience." The woman in 7C nodded even though she was unsure. Everyone was trying to comfort someone else, but nobody really knew what was happening. Just then, one of the flight attendants walked by again. She wasn't rushing this time, but she wasn't relaxed either. The woman in 7C watched her carefully. She noticed how the attendant occasionally touched her earpiece, as if listening to someone inside the cockpit. Her face tightened every time she did. It was a small detail, but small details felt huge right now. The attendant reached the front, whispered to another crew member, then stepped toward the curtain again. Before she entered, she paused, took a very slow breath, and straightened her uniform as if preparing mentally. Then she disappeared behind the curtain. Almost immediately after that, the plane made a quiet change. The nose lifted, just slightly. A few passengers gasped. Some held onto the seats. The engines adjusted again. The woman in 7C closed her eyes for a moment and whispered, "Please let everything be okay," the same words she had repeated earlier. She didn't know who she was speaking to. Fate, luck, God, anyone who might be listening. After several long minutes, the intercom clicked again, but it wasn't the captain. It wasn't the co-pilot, and it wasn't the man who had gone into the cockpit. It was the flight attendant. Her voice was calm, steady, and trained to hide worry. But underneath, the woman in 7C could hear a thin thread of strain. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are coordinating with ground teams. Please stay seated with your seatbelts fastened." That was it. No explanation. Number. Details. No reassurance. People exchanged fearful looks. Coordinating with ground teams? Why? The woman in 7C felt her stomach twist. That phrase wasn't used on normal flights. It sounded like a code for something serious. Something too big for the crew to handle alone. Suddenly, the man who had gone to the cockpit reappeared again. Only this time he stepped into the aisle. He didn't go far, just a few steps, his face slightly pale, his shoulders tense. Everyone stared at him like he was holding their fate in his hands. He didn't make an announcement. He didn't speak loudly. He simply raised his voice enough for the first few rows to hear. "We're stabilizing the plane," he said quietly. "I need to go back in. Please stay calm." Then he walked forward again and disappeared behind the curtain. People whispered instantly. What does stabilizing mean? Is he controlling the plane? What about the co-pilot? Why isn't he flying? The woman in 7C didn't join the speculation. She pressed her palm gently against her chest, trying to slow her heartbeat. Her fingers trembled. She looked out the window. The sky was still bright, the clouds still soft, the world still peaceful outside. It felt so strange that inside this giant machine, hundreds of hearts were racing together. The minutes stretched longer. Too long. The plane dropped slightly again. Not sharply, but enough to make her grip her seat. The engines responded with a low roar, then leveled out. Some passengers cried softly. Some held hands with strangers. Some closed their eyes tightly, refusing to look at anything. Then something different happened. A sound, not an alarm, not a voice. A knock, a single knock from behind the cockpit door. It was followed by another. The woman in 7C's eyes widened. She wasn't the only one who noticed. The entire front section of the cabin turned their heads in that direction. The knock came again, softer this time. A flight attendant rushed to the curtain, not running, but close enough. She slipped inside quickly. The curtain closed behind her. For a moment, no one breathed. Again, nothing. The plane stayed steady, but the silence felt heavier. It pressed down on everyone. Then, finally, the intercom clicked. "Ladies and gentlemen," the man's voice said. The same man who had entered earlier. "We need someone who can assist with navigation. If anyone has experience with aircraft instruments, please let the crew know." The woman in 7C felt her blood run cold. Navigation? That meant he wasn't sure how to read some of the controls. That meant the situation inside the cockpit was worse than anyone had imagined. Her fingers curled tightly around the armrests. She looked around. No one was moving, not a single person. Everyone was frozen, overwhelmed, terrified, unsure. For a split second, she felt something strange inside her, a pull, a pressure, a thought she couldn't ignore. She wasn't a pilot. She wasn't trained. She wasn't even brave most days. But she had read something once. Something important. Something about navigation instruments and flight paths. She didn't know if it meant anything now, but it rose in her mind like a memory. Refusing to stay quiet, she took a slow breath. Her heart pounded. She stared at the call button, but she didn't touch it. Not yet, not until she was sure, because once she pressed it, everything would change. The woman in 7C breathed slowly, staring at the small round call button above her head. That single button felt heavier than anything she had ever seen before. It wasn't just plastic and light. It felt like a door to something she wasn't sure she could walk through. Passengers whispered around her, quiet and shaky. What does navigation mean? Is he flying blind? What happened to the co-pilot? Why can't they come out? What if nobody knows? Anything? Questions spread like ripples, each one adding to the fear in the air. But nobody stood up. Nobody pressed a button. Nobody claimed they could help. The woman leaned back, shutting her eyes for a moment. She tried to focus, tried to breathe, tried to think. The memory that had surfaced inside her didn't come from piloting lessons or real training. It came from something far smaller, a volunteer day she once spent at a local airshow, where a retired aviator had explained cockpit screens to visitors. She remembered him laughing kindly, telling her what the horizon indicator meant, how altitude was displayed, and how a flight path could be followed even when clouds blocked all visibility. It wasn't real training, that it wasn't enough to fly a plane, but maybe it was enough to help someone who already knew the basics but needed guidance. Her breath trembled. She opened her eyes and looked around again. Everyone was waiting for someone else to step forward. But nobody did. Intercom crackled again, the man's voice even tighter this time. If anyone has experience with aircraft instruments, even basic understanding, please notify the crew. Basic understanding. Those two words echoed inside her mind. Her hand lifted slightly. Not fully, just an inch. She hesitated. Her fingers shook. She lowered her hand again. Fear held her in place, heavy and cold. A flight attendant passed by, moving faster than before. Her eyes were wide, but she still tried to smile at people who looked frightened. When she reached row 7, her gaze briefly met the woman's. Something in the attendant's look, a worn-down hope, a silent plea, made the woman swallow hard. The woman in 7C spoke quietly, barely audible. Is it bad? The attendant stopped. She didn't answer right away. She looked over her shoulder, as if making sure no one was listening too closely, then leaned slightly closer. We just need support with some readings, she whispered. He's doing everything he can, but he needs someone beside him who understands instrument panels. Someone beside him. She felt her heartbeat quicken. I'm not trained, the woman said. I just know a little, very little. The attendant nodded softly, as if she already expected that. Anything helps at this moment. Anything. The word stayed with her. She looked at the call button again. She reached up slowly, then stopped halfway. She was terrified. Her hands were cold. Her throat felt tight. What if she made things worse? What if she misunderstood something? What if one wrong suggestion caused a mistake? Her mind raced with these thoughts. Then the plane shifted. Again, a small tilt. Not sharp, but unmistakable. It lasted longer this time, and passengers grabbed armrests and seatbacks. Someone cried out softly. Another person whispered, "Please no, please no." The woman in 7C felt fear strike through her, but this time, something else followed. Its strange clarity. A sudden understanding that waiting wasn't helping. The man inside the cockpit was trying his best alone. The crew was doing everything they could. And she was sitting here with knowledge that might help, even if just a little. Her heart pounded hard in her chest. She reached up again. Her finger hovered for a second. Then finally, She pressed the call button. It chimed softly. The sound felt louder than it should have. People nearby looked at her, confused, surprised, maybe even hopeful. A flight attendant came quickly. "Yes, are you okay?" The woman's voice wavered. I might be able to help. Not fly, but I understand. Some navigation instruments. Not much, but maybe enough. The attendant didn't waste even a heartbeat. She nodded firmly. "Come with me." The woman unbuckled her seatbelt with shaking hands. Her legs felt weak as she slowly stood. She felt dozens of eyes watching her, some full of fear, some full of hope, some simply desperate for anyone to do something. As she stepped into the aisle, the world felt unreal. She wasn't brave. She wasn't trained. She wasn't someone who had ever imagined being in a situation like this. But now she was walking toward the front of a plane in distress, guided by a crew member who believed even her small knowledge could make a difference. The curtain near the cockpit felt like a wall. She was crossing into another world. When they reached it, the attendant paused, gave her a small, almost grateful look, then lifted the curtain. Inside, everything looked different from what she expected. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, focused, intense. The man who had stepped in earlier was in the captain's seat. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His eyes were fixed on the screens. His hands hovered near the controls. Careful, deliberate. A few screens displayed warnings she didn't understand. A soft repeating tone came from somewhere. The woman felt her breath catch. He looked up for a moment and saw her. "You know instruments?" he asked quickly. "Some," she answered honestly. "Very basic," he nodded. "Basic is enough. I just need someone to help me interpret the readings while I manage the controls." She swallowed, then stepped forward. The cockpit felt both too small and too important. Every button, every switch, every display suddenly looked like a responsibility she had never wanted, but had silently accepted the moment. She pressed the call button. The man steadied the plane again. He pointed to one of the screens. "Tell me what you see here, the horizon indicator. Just confirm I'm reading it right." She leaned closer. Her heart thudded. Her hands trembled. But she spoke. "You're level," she said quietly. "But you're drifting slightly left." The man nodded sharply. "Good. That's what I thought. I needed confirmation." She exhaled slowly. She could help. At least a little. Behind them, the cockpit door closed softly. And in that enclosed space, with hundreds of lives depending on them, she took her first step into a role she never imagined. The unexpected guide beside the stranger, trying to keep everyone safe. The cockpit door clicked shut behind them, sealing the woman into a world she had only ever seen in pictures. The space was small, tighter than she expected, filled with screens, buttons, blinking indicators, and soft alarms that pulsed like distant heartbeats. It didn't feel like a place meant for fear. It felt like a place meant for focus. But fear was there anyway, hiding in every shadow and every warning light. The man in the captain's seat gave her a quick glance, then returned his eyes to the panel. "Stay beside me. Read out anything I ask for. Slow and clear." She nodded, her voice barely forming words. "Okay." Her legs felt weak as she stepped closer. She placed one hand on the back of the co-pilot's empty seat, steadying herself. For a moment, she wondered where the co-pilot was, why he hadn't taken control. But she pushed the question away. Whatever the situation was, she knew this wasn't the time to ask. Another soft alarm beeped. Not loud, almost polite, but insistent. The man checked one of the readings, exhaled sharply, and whispered, "We're drifting off the planned route. Need to correct it before the system starts compensating on its own." He adjusted a control gently. The aircraft shifted slightly, steadying again. The woman swallowed. "Tell me what you need." He pointed to the screens. "Start with altitude. Confirm what you see." She leaned forward, her eyes scanning the numbers carefully. She didn't want to rush. She didn't want to misread anything. She breathed slowly and read it out. 32,000, he waited. And holding. He nodded. Good. He tapped another button. Now speed. She read it, her voice steadier this time. Still within range. Good, he said again, but she could hear the tension hiding under the word. Another alarm blinked. This one. Steady, not urgent, but enough to make the man tighten his grip on the controls. He silenced it, then whispered, "We're okay." Just systems reacting. The woman felt her heartbeat quicken. Is something failing? Not failing, he said. Just sensitive right now. He inhaled deeply. We're trying to bring the plane into full manual mode without losing stability. Manual mode. That meant autopilot wasn't enough anymore. Her stomach dropped. The man looked at her again, this time with a seriousness that felt heavier than any alarm. I need your eyes. I can fly, but I need you to confirm readings faster. Then I can look at them. She nodded again. I'll do everything I can. Together, they began checking each reading. Altitude, pitch, horizon, speed, fuel distribution. She read. He corrected. She watched. He guided. For the first time. Since she boarded the plane, she felt like she wasn't powerless. She felt like she was part of something important, something bigger than fear. And the man in the seat. He seemed to grow steadier too. Not confident, but anchored by her presence. After several minutes, the plane finally reached a smoother balance. The warnings dimmed. The sounds softened. She exhaled deeply. We're stable, for now, he said, but we're not done. The words hit her like cold air. He pointed to a navigation display showing a long arc on the map. This aircraft is heading far off the original path. We need to redirect or we won't reach a safe airspace to land. She studied the map. The curved line showing their route drifted slightly from the intended track. The difference wasn't huge yet, but if it continued, how do we fix it? She asked. He hesitated. She could see the truth in his eyes. He wasn't fully sure. He knew some things, enough to stabilize, but not everything. We need to realign, but I need help reading the navigation markers. She searched her memory. The old aviator at the air show had held a laminated card showing how pilots used indicators to follow a flight path. She could still remember him saying, "This little arrow is your friend. When in doubt, follow it. It tells you where the route wants you to go." She leaned closer, trembling a little. That arrow, it's showing where the path is. You need to slowly turn the heading toward it. Not fast, a small correction. The man studied her face as if checking if she was guessing or truly remembering something real. When he saw the clarity in her eyes, he nodded and turned the heading control very gently. The plane responded smoothly, almost gratefully. The drift on the map paused. Then slowly. It began sliding back toward the correct path. She felt a wave of relief so strong she almost cried. But she held it in. The man looked at her again. That helped. She nodded, trying not to shake. We're moving back. But then, another soft chime sounded. A message flashed on one of the screens. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone in the man's breath when he saw it. What is it? She whispered. He didn't answer at first. Clicked a button, checked another display, and finally said, "We're going to need to land sooner than expected." Sooner? She repeated, her voice weak. "We're losing fuel faster than normal," he said quietly. "Not dangerously fast, but fast enough that we can't continue on the full long route." She felt her chest tighten. "Is there an airport close?" "Yes," he said. "But the approach will be rough. We'll need full concentration. And I'll still need you." She took a deep breath, steadying her hands. She didn't feel brave. She just felt needed. "Tell me what to do," she said quietly. The man nodded once, and for the first time, There was a flicker of hope in his eyes. Asterisk. The Coendly. The man nodded once, and for the first time, there was a flicker of hope in his eyes. Woman in 7C stood inside the cockpit, her breath unsteady, her hands cold, but her focus sharper than ever. The man at the controls nodded once more, as if confirming silently that they were in this together now. The plane hummed beneath them, a giant metal body trusting two people who never expected to guide it. "Look at the map again," he said quietly. She leaned forward. The curved line on the screen slowly aligned with the correct route, but a new red marker blinked softly near the bottom edge of the display. The alternate airport the ground team had suggested. "It's closer than our original destination," he explained. "But the approach angle is tighter. We'll have to descend earlier than usual." She stared at the blinking marker. "Can we make it?" "We have to," he said. "There's no second option." Another soft beep pulsed through the cockpit. The kind that wasn't dangerous but wasn't comforting either. The woman pressed her hands together, trying to calm her shaking. "Tell me altitude again," he said. She read it clearly. 31,000 and dropping slowly. He adjusted the controls, guiding the plane into a gentle descent. Outside the cockpit windows, the sky was beginning to shift from a bright gold to a softer blue, the horizon stretching endless and calm. But the calmness only made the situation feel stranger. The danger wasn't outside. It was hidden inside. Numbers, screens, controls, and time. The intercom clicked again, and the man leaned to speak. His voice stayed steady, but softer than before. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be preparing for an early landing. Please stay seated and follow crew." Instructions. He didn't mention the emergency. He didn't mention fuel. He didn't mention how uncertain things were. The cabin didn't need those details now. She imagined how the passengers must be reacting, some praying, some whispering, some gripping each other's hands. People she couldn't see but could almost feel through the door. People waiting, hoping, trusting. She returned her eyes to the screens. "Check our descent rate," he said. She read it calmly. "Normal," he nodded. "Good." Another alarm appeared, this one a muted orange light. "What does that mean?" She whispered. "Wind shift," he said. "We'll need to correct soon." He adjusted the controls again, guiding the plane through smoother air. The woman watched his movements carefully. He wasn't a trained airline captain, not by profession, but his hands were steady and careful, like someone who respected the machine he was handling. She pointed to another screen. "Your left drift is back, just a little." He corrected it instantly. "Keep watching. Don't let me miss anything." She nodded. "I won't." Minutes passed. Slow and heavy. The plane continued its descent, and for a moment, everything went smoothly. Too smoothly. That worried her even more. It felt like silence before a storm dot. Then the fuel alert blinked again. This time brighter. This time louder. The man inhaled sharply. "It's dropping quicker than expected." Her stomach clenched. "How bad?" He hesitated before answering. "We'll reach the airport, but we need to descend faster now." "Faster?" She whispered, fear catching her throat. "If we wait too long," he said, eyes on the approaching runway marker, "we risk running low before reaching final approach." He turned a dial gently. The plane dipped into a steeper descent. The woman grabbed the back of the seat to steady herself as gravity shifted slightly. She could almost feel the passengers behind them reacting, gasping, tightening their seatbelts, some looking at each other with wide, frightened eyes. "Watch the horizon line," he said. She watched the screen. Her voice softened. "It's stable, don't tilt more." He nodded, easing the descent slightly. "Good, keep telling me." The plane vibrated softly, not turbulence, but pressure adjusting from the sudden altitude change. Her heartbeat raced. Her mouth felt dry. But she didn't look away from the screens. A small message popped up, winds increasing on approach. "What's that?" she asked. "Crosswind," he said. "We'll have to land with a slight angle." Her heart dropped. "Is that safe?" "It can be," he replied, "if done right." His words were brave, but she could feel his tension. A single mistake in crosswind landings could send a plane off center. But they didn't have a choice. "Tell me the angle again," he said. She read it, still within the safe range, but rising. He adjusted the controls again, gently guiding the aircraft into a better line. The woman breathed out slowly. She could see sweat forming on his forehead, but he kept going, steady, determined. "Fuel level?" he asked Dot. She looked. Her chest tightened, lower than before. "But still enough if we don't delay." He exhaled deeply. "We won't delay." Outside the windows, the first thin layers of clouds brushed past, soft and white. The world below them came closer, shapes of land, faint outlines of fields, a soft haze covering distant cities. The woman bit her lip. "People must be scared. Out there." "They're counting on us," he said. She nodded slowly. "And we won't let them down." He glanced at her, the first real look he'd given that wasn't about screens or instructions. Not admiration, not fear, something else. Maybe trust. He pointed at the runway marker as it blinked brighter. "We're getting close. Once we start final approach, everything will move fast." Her breath trembled. "What do you need me to do?" "Stay with me," he said. "Read everything. Watch everything. Tell me every shift." She took a deep breath, then another, and whispered, "I'm ready." Because somehow, in all this fear, something unexpected was happening inside. She wasn't hiding from the moment anymore. She was rising to meet it. The sky ahead widened, the descent steepened, the runway grew closer, and the woman in 7C, who once sat half asleep with no idea what awaited her, now stood beside a man guiding a full aircraft toward the ground, with hundreds depending on them both. The final test was beginning. Asterisk, the runway marker on the navigation screen, blinked brighter now, like a guiding light calling them closer. Outside the cockpit windows, the world below had shape again. Blurred patches of fields, faint roads, and distant rooftops. The woman in 7C stood behind the co-pilot's empty seat, her hands gripping it for balance, her heart beating so loudly. She could almost hear it. The man at the controls breathed out slowly. "This is it," he said. "Final approach." She nodded, though the air felt thick around her. "Tell me what you need." He kept his eyes ahead. "Start calling out the horizon. I need to know if we drift." She leaned closer to the screen. Still level, still centered. The plane continued to descend, the engine softening to a gentler hum. The ground came closer, the details growing sharper, lines on a road. A tiny moving car, a field of golden grass swaying under the fan. Wind. She swallowed. This was real. This was happening. And there was no turning back. A crosswind alert flashed. Her voice trembled. "Wind picking up on the left." He nodded, adjusting slightly. "Keep talking, don't stop." She steadied her breathing. Still holding, still level, drift to the left again. Small. He corrected it immediately. The cockpit shook lightly. Not dangerous, but enough to make her grip the seat harder. Behind the door, she could almost feel the passengers reacting. 2. People clutching their seatbelts. Parents holding their children. Elderly passengers whispering prayers. Dozens of people depending on the two of them. A small fuel chime echoed again. Her eyes widened. Fuel dropping fast. "We're landing now," he said firmly. "We're committed." The runway grew larger outside the window, a long strip of gray surrounded by open fields. It looked both welcoming and terrifying, like a promise and a test at the same time. "Altitude?" he asked Dot. She read it. "Dropping, on target," Speed? She checked. A little high. He adjusted the throttle gently. The engine softened. Even more. Back on target, she said. The man exhaled, then spoke into the intercom. Cabin crew, please prepare for landing. His voice was calm, but she could hear the weight behind it. He leaned forward, hands firm on the controls. This will get bumpy, she nodded, her fingers cold but steady. I'm here, keep going. The plane dipped into the final stretch, and the runway filled the entire window now. The woman watched the horizon indicator closely. Every tiny shift mattered. Every number mattered. Every second mattered. Left drift again. She said quickly. He corrected. Too far right now. He corrected again. The plane bounced slightly in the air. A dip, a lift, a sway. Her heart nearly stopped. Hold level. Hold. Got it, he whispered. The wind tugged at the aircraft again, but he steadied it with careful hands. The woman's voice came quicker now, one reading after another, clear and sharp. Speed steady. Angle good. Horizon slightly tilted. Fix. He fixed it. Glide path perfect. Don't change it. He didn't. The plane dropped lower and lower. The runway edges blurred past the window. The tires were seconds away from touching the ground. She held her breath. He tightened his grip. The engines howled softly. The wheels met the runway. Hard bump. A second. The plane bounced once, then settled. A long shuddering roll followed as the man guided the aircraft straight down the center line. The woman watched every drift, calling out corrections. Slight right. He corrected. Hold. Hold. The speed slowed. The runway markers rushed past slower and slower, until the plane finally came to a heavy rumbling stop. Silence. A deep, stunning silence filled the cockpit. The man closed his eyes for one long second. The woman felt her knees weaken, relief washing through her so suddenly she needed to grip the seat just to stay standing. Then the cabin behind them erupted, crying, cheering, praying, laughing. The sound came through the door like a wave of emotion the plane had been holding in. The man leaned back in the captain's seat, breathing hard but smiling in disbelief. We did it. The woman nodded, tears gathering in her eyes even though she didn't let them fall. You did it. No, he said quietly, turning toward her. We did it. I couldn't have checked everything alone.